welcome. Thank you so much, Rachel, for getting this set up. And it is so lovely to see you in the room tonight. Thank you to our speakers for coming and giving us their time. And it's especially lovely to have Temple Grandin. I've read a number of her books and it's like a dream come true to know she's in here in Wales virtually. And so we're really grateful for your knowledge and your sharing tonight. We've been doing a number of these Crip talks over the last few months, and we found the lockdowns helped us to work differently digitally, to keep connected. And it's important we keep connected. DAC, Disability Arts Cymru, is a membership organisation. So I encourage you to become a free member if you're disabled and deaf, no charge at all, so that we can keep in touch with you, find ways of supporting you, and you tell us what you need in order to thrive and survive in these times as artists and creators in the country. There'll be details in some of the registration about that. I won't say any more, but I thank Rachel for putting all her work in to get this together, and hope you really enjoyed the event, and look forward to seeing you at some of the events that are up and coming in the next few months as well. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. So I'm going to talk about 15 years ago, somewhere around there. That was when I first started to realise that I was probably autistic. And before I got that professionally confirmed, what did I do? I researched the hell out of it, like only an autistic person can. And Temple Grandin's books were on my reading list, and I watched the talk, many versions of the talk. And now, if you want to learn about autism, there's masses of resources out there. But 15 years ago, there wasn't, especially women, autistic women's voices. They were hard to find. So I was really, really grateful to Temple for doing what she did, because it helped put me on a path to understanding myself and my autism. So I didn't really think 15 years later we'd be sitting in a virtual room together, but there you go. That's life. That's pandemic. That's Zoom. So what I've done is invited 3 guests. We've each talked about a topic, and each of my 3 guests is then going to talk for 10 minutes to Temple, and then we'll have a quick little break. I'll bring you all into the room and we'll have a Q&A. Now, if you
can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
Nope.
Okay. Is everyone else having a problem hearing me?
Well, very, very faint.
Okay.
You were loud and then you went faint.
Is that the case for anyone else? No, I wonder if it's at your end then. Can you turn a volume up or anything? Okay, in a moment, I'm not going to be talking anyway, so that'll solve that one. So what I'm going to do then is, before we go into the conversations, is we'll go around and do the audio descriptions. So if it's all right, we'll do that in alphabetical order. So that means starting with Gaia.
Hi, I'm Gaia. I'm a middle-aged female. I have long brown hair. I'm wearing purple glasses and a green woven top. And behind me is a nice throw with a mandala on it.
And on to Grace, please.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Grace. I'm a white woman in my 30s. I am wearing brown and navy glasses, a velvet green turban, and a black cardigan. And in my background are lots of books arranged in rainbow colours on the shelves, and some very rainbowish paintings which actually match up with the books. Thank you.
Thank you. And on to Ree, please.
Hello, I'm Ree, and I'm a 40-year-old white woman with brown eyes and long brown curly hair. I've got some plants on the windowsill next to me and some lockdown art on the wall behind me.
Thank you. And on to Temple, please.
Well, I'm Temple Grandin. I'm a professor of animal science at Colorado State University, and I'm an older person. I'm 73 years old.
Thank you very much. Do you know, I always forget to do my own. So I'm a 50-something white woman with big, thick glasses, and I've got my I'm So Autistic headset on. That's what I look like. Okay. So we're going to go on to the first conversation now, and I'm really pleased that Ree agreed to do this, because Ree was part of our previous conversation, which was autism. Are we a cultural minority? So I thought, great bit of continuity there. And Ree and I had a conversation by email, talked about a lot of different things: sheep, big cats, hairy peas, all sorts of things, and came to the conclusion that for all the complications of it all, let's just talk about one amazing thing: autistic joy. There we are. So you now have 10 minutes on the topic of autistic joy. Go.
Firstly, can I say what an absolute pleasure it is to meet you, Temple? I
Thank you.
come from a farming background as well, so it would be very tempting for me to go down that route, but I'm going to avoid that for today and stick to my creative roots as well. So what came out of the last time we talked was the idea of autistic joy, and that's something that I base my creativity on. I think in a lot of ways it's something that brings me great pleasure. So many difficulties that come with autism, and I don't pretend those don't exist, but there's also this great autistic passion and joy that comes with it. And for me, that comes across in two different ways. The first is sort of that sensory joy when you spot a pattern and you get caught in it. And there's that moment of, it's just so soothing and beautiful for me. And then my other one is when I get that creative problem solving moment, because I like to be practical, I like to create things, and I like them to work and do things. And that moment when I get into that groove, my brain is so noisy all the time. But when that happens, it all focuses in one way, all those different tendrils of thoughts, all focus towards problem solving that one thing and getting to that one solution. So what I wanted to start off with was asking you, what is your source of autistic joy?
Well, I like the problem solving too. I was really interested to hear that you say you like the same thing. I get a great joy out of solving a problem. I just talked to a lady this morning and I helped her solve a problem with some of her animals. Or I'll have a parent write to me and say, well, my kid's doing great and he's in college now because of your book. In other words, trying to figure out how to make things work. How do we actually do things in the world, make something work? Like I'm designing stuff, and I design something and then it works really well. You know, that's when I'm really happy, because I am what I do. And I introduce myself as a college professor first, because that's my primary identity. And I get asked all the time, if I could snap my fingers, would I want to not be autistic? No, because I like the logical way I think. I wouldn't want to change. But the college professor and engineering stuff and design stuff, you know, that kind of comes first. And I'm realizing more and more like how I think I can bring some problem solving to the table that other people might not be able to do. And when I first started in the cattle industry in the 70s, I was a woman in a man's industry. That was a much bigger barrier than autism was. But what I had to do is to make myself really, really, really good at what I did. So I would sell my work. I would show people my drawings. My way of selling my work was just to get the drawings out and get them out and show them to people. And I made myself good at something that's a skill other people want. I get the most, friends who shared interests, things like cattle. I'm interested in autism, building stuff, concrete form work. I can find that really, really interesting. Then sometimes I can just get the giggles out of the dumbest things. I see you're laughing. One time I was with one of my friends when we were behind a truck that said, "We ship anything, anywhere." And I thought, I can think of something to ship. You will ship only once. And then we got laughing about what it might be.
Excellent. I love that. I love the idea of you are what you do, and that is your passion. That
I
creativity.
am what I do.
It's just
and having I talked to a lady this morning that is making a very nice community website, free of politics, no politics, but okay, let's just get, let's promote the local shops and things like that. And it's been getting some traffic and doing some good for their town. And she's on the spectrum. And that's something worthwhile. You see, it's doing things.
And I think it's that drive, it's finding your niche in life.
Yeah, that's right.
That is your passion. And that for me is the route to any autistic person being happy, is working from their interest, working with themselves.
But on the other hand, the problem I'm seeing today is kids are not getting exposed to enough stuff to find what the passion is, because I didn't get exposed to cattle until I was a teenager. And if I hadn't been exposed to them, I would have not been interested in them. And I'm seeing too many kids getting addicted to video games. And one of my big complaints is the schools have taken out too many hands-on classes, art, theater, sewing, music, band, choir, woodworking, automobile shop, welding, because it's harder for them to find something to be the passion. You have to be exposed to something, find out if you're going to be interested in it. And for me, I wasn't around any cattle until I was a teenager.
I couldn't agree more with that. I think the more we sort of narrow things down in schooling to stuff we can quantify, I mean, there are a lot of amazing autistic scientists, engineers, mathematicians, absolutely. But as you say, exposing yourself to all the arts, all the different ways of doing things, how else are you going to work out what you know?
When it came to the school play, I wasn't that interested in acting in it. I wanted to make the costumes and the scenery. And I did, starting with that in 4th grade. And then for our high school play, we had trial by jury. And I made all the jury boxes and lawyer stands and judges stand out of cardboard boxes and painted them, make them look like wood paneling. I built all the sets for our high school play, trial by jury. And that is things that I like to do. Okay, well, if we hadn't had a play, there wouldn't have been any scenery to design. I didn't really want to act in it. I just wanted to make costumes and sets. But that's something that can turn into a career.
Yeah.
That's why you don't take theater out of the schools.
Yeah. I mean, I write plays. It's one of the things I do. And being able to do that, being able to tour those plays, having that access to the arts to do that, I wouldn't have gone down the route of writing.
Well,
I wouldn't have had
know
that.
You like plays if you never saw any plays.
Exactly. I wouldn't have had a clue.
I'm seeing kids today that like to build Legos, and he's 16 years old and nobody thought to introduce tools when he was younger. I'm seeing that over and over again. Another thing I'm seeing is a lot of grandmothers, grandparents coming up to me, and they find out they're on the spectrum when the kids get diagnosed. And, grandmother or granddad's an engineer or some other, decent job. They learned working skills but I am what I do. And I think that that's hard to think of. Some people have a hard time. They're more about what they feel.
Yeah.
But I get
logic, isn't it?
It's logic, but I also get a great deal of satisfaction where, okay, I talked to where I have a parent say, well, thank you so much. You figured out what's wrong with my kid and we found that medication and it worked. Or you just helped me with my cattle. And I just talked to a lady today and her calf's bloating. I said, you've got to do something about that right now. I am not a veterinarian. You've got to get someone to treat that. Yeah. Well, that's probably going to save the life of that calf.
Absolutely.
Okay, that is something that's something worthwhile. And it's about we need more people in this world doing things rather than just talking about stuff and fighting over it.
I couldn't agree. I think I always come back. I'm always surprised that people don't think logically. I mean, I think I got my diagnosis later on in life, and what I found out then was that people don't think like me. I was assuming everybody else did, and they don't. They absolutely don't. And coming to that realization has been enormous. I find it really, really strange to think of going through the world and not analyzing all the data to work out the best way forward.
That's what I do. That's exactly what I do. And when I was in my 20s and I first started working in the cattle industry, I didn't know that other people didn't think in pictures. I thought everybody thought in pictures. So it was obvious to me to go look and see what cattle were looking at. And it was a shock to me to find that there's some people that are so verbal that if you say something to them like, think about a church steeple, all they see is this. That was a speech therapist. He just, you know, the most vague outline. I start naming off where they're at, and they come up like a bunch of photographs. And I thought everybody thought that way. And I'm kind of sometimes just how shocked at so-called normal human beings, how illogical they can be.
Yeah, very much so. I'm not amazingly visual. I have a weird thing. I know you described it as sort of Google images in your head.
Yeah, that's Google images.
I have them all on top of each other. I have all the images on top of each other. So if you ask me to picture someone that I know really well, I'll picture all the different versions I've ever seen of them on top of each other, and it creates quite a blurry image for me.
No, I see them individually.
Lovely.
And then I can stop it and put pause on it.
Wow.
And then turn it into a video. And then if you want to take that house and paint it pink or green or something, I can do that.
That's
30 seconds.
Oh my goodness. This has been an absolute pleasure. I'm not sure we spoke about autistic joy enough, but that logic and that joy and that passion, I think
but that's part of it. I get
so
great
much.
satisfaction that, you know, okay, I had a student call me the other night and she had some problems and I think I helped her solve them. Okay, that's something worthwhile.
Absolutely. I always think when I'm feeling a bit low, helping someone else solve something makes me feel better, very selfishly. Well, thank you so much. That's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah, somebody wrote on here, deeds, not words.
Not words. That's perfect.
I love it. Thank you, Ree. Now, Gaia, someone I've only met more recently. So we kind of had a conversation about, you know, funding authorities and how they're so inaccessible and everything they do, that kind of conversation like you do. But we ended up sort of solving that problem because we like problem solving, as we've just heard all about. So had a Zoom with Gaia about what the topic was going to be. And again, we talked about all sorts of different things, but Gaia told a story. I'm not going to spoiler it. That at the end of the conversation made me go, that's the thing you need to talk about. And that story links to a topic that is actually, I think, going to be helpful for more than just some of you in the room. So the topic is proprioceptive feedback. And I'll hand over now to Gaia and Temple.
Hi, Temple. It's good to speak to you over all this distance. Yeah, the memory that Rachel was speaking about was a memory that I have from when I was a very, very young child. Must have been sort of 5 or 6 years old. And I turned round and looked at the television screen. I wasn't watching the program per se, but I turned round and saw the screen. And on the screen was a lady in a cowboy shirt. And I didn't understand what she was talking about greatly, but there was a cattle crush there. And the idea of being inside this cattle crush and holding you. And at a very, very young age, I remember this really unusual feeling that came over me, this very, very strange feeling when I saw you on the screen with this cattle crush. And I will never, ever forget this feeling. And it was almost a feeling that said, that's for me. That is exactly for me. And 35, 40 years on, I now have a diagnosis of autism and have discovered how beneficial proprioceptive feedback is for me and for a lot of people in my position. So I spent a lot of time thinking what my ideal thing would be, like you did. I've read your autobiography, so like you did with the machine, you imagine different things. And what I imagine, although the squeezing is good for me, the motion of rocking is as well. So I imagine all different kinds of rocking horses and rocking chairs and different things that I could make and turn them into sculptures. Do you still find that your squeeze machine, your hug machine is still the most effective thing for you? And what do you And if not, what is it? And what do you use when you're traveling the world?
Well, actually, I've kind of used what I call the virtual squeeze machine, where I can imagine it in my head. I've done that. And one of the reasons why the squeezing machine worked is because it was pressure over wide areas of the body. Also, I could precisely control it. That was another really important thing, because there's some individuals who've gotten reduced noise sensitivity when they started working with noises they could control, like a hairdryer or a vacuum cleaner. There were some kids that went from hating the vacuum cleaner to actually liking to play with it when they could control that startle. And when I was really young, I couldn't stand to be held because the feeling was too intense. But when I got the squeeze machine, I could control it. And that's important. And then a lot of people use weighted blankets, weighted vests. That's the same thing. Of course, I can take that off. But the squeeze machine did more pressure. And then I could put it on the sides of my body, because you can't squeeze front to back. You wouldn't be able to breathe. But the thing that's important was controlling it. And there's a lot of things that people can do. One of the things, I went to a very interesting discussion on masking, and I found out that a lot of that is sensory. And one of the things is they're not allowed to do something with their hands. And I've been finding now, well, right now I've got a binder clip in my hands. It doesn't make any noise. And I'm playing with the binder clip. And I'll be in meetings where, okay, I have something like a little binder clip. That doesn't bother anybody. You know, and I'll do things like, here's an article I did on, here's a brain research article that I doodled and scribbled all over. That's another thing I'll do, occupy my hands. Again, it doesn't bother anybody.
Yeah, I mean, I've always got a pencil. In a meeting, I've always got a pencil. And yes, it's useful for writing notes, but I play with it. I've got my lap pad, if I can just sort of raise that up. It's got a pillowcase on, so I've got my lap pad with me. But I find that things that are repetitive are wonderful for me. So spinning and weaving, and oh my goodness, if I could do block paving, I would do it forevermore. Block paving, dry stone walling, things where I can fit things together, and I can feel the texture of it in my mouth. It's that multi-sensory thing that is just so beautiful, I find.
Because there's sensory stuff, you know, I really like there are some people on the spectrum that hate bright lights and stuff. I liked it. I didn't like the sound of fireworks, but I loved watching them. I liked psychedelic light shows. And of course, we did things like stretch a piece of rubber over a speaker and stick little mirrors on it, and then reflect the light off it, and that would jounce in time with the music on the ceiling.
Wow.
Really,
wow.
Really.
That would be my hell, I must say. That would be my hell.
But yeah, I liked it. See, this is where sensory stuff is different. You know, there's some people that like stripes and checkerboards that just hate them. I actually kind of liked them, but that's this is where these sensory issues are so different. My problem was mainly loud noise, and I you know, and touch sensitivity problems.
Yeah, I find that I talk to a lot of people about sensory processing, and they ask me how they can accommodate people and embrace people. And I say one of the problems is if you're in one space, there are people that will be drawn to different things, like you've just said, and we've just spoken about. Some people love the bright lights. Some people find them really, really difficult.
Hate them. And
opposites.
You know, my number one area for research would be how to deal with some of these sensory issues.
Yeah.
And I've looked at some of the brain research, and in some cases, a sense that doesn't bother most people just lights up every fear circuit in the brain. Well, that's going to be really debilitating, and you know, some little innocuous thing. And I still have some auditory processing problems. I can't hear in a noisy restaurant. Never have been able to. But how do I deal with all the noise in a meatpacking plant? Well, we don't have many conservations out on the floor where the noise is, because I can't not.
We actually, myself and my family actually moved half away across the country because I couldn't cope in the city anymore. I need a space that I can retreat to, but then go into that space. It's that control thing, being able to control the sound.
Having some control. What are you doing professionally now? What do you do now?
I'm an artist, so I'm a freelance artist. I run projects to support disabled artists, specifically neurodiverse artists, so they understand their access needs, but also their huge talents and how they can adapt to access things, to access funding, to access opportunities. So absolutely love it.
Well, there's so many, new things you can do on the web and stuff, getting things out there. I mean, I started my livestock handling business one little job at a time. And then I wrote about the projects in our local farm magazine and then also in our national cattle magazines. And writing was a skill that was very, very helpful in my business. And one thing I'm very concerned about right now, a lot of students, just our regular students, they're not teaching writing anymore. I cannot believe how bad some graduate students' writing is, and I have to correct it. Because that's how I promoted my businesses. I wrote about stuff.
Yeah, I find I need to do a lot of writing to promote what I do, but there's also a lot of speaking to people.
Well, I do the same thing. I did a lot of talking on the phone because some of the social problems I had, they didn't show on the phone. I loved the phone because I was good on the phone. Cold calling, I'd sell jobs on the phone.
Well, I don't like phones. I really don't like phones. Video calls are great because I can see the person.
No, that's right. And I like, doing this. But a lot of students today, they just want to text. But I had one student just the other day, she texted me about a problem with her homework. And then I had a long call with her and I helped her with some other stuff that's private and it's recent, so I can't talk about it. But it went beyond her homework, let's put it that way. And that conversation would not have happened if I hadn't been on the phone.
Yeah. I was shown the what I see as a joy of using WhatsApp, actually. You'll probably be horrified at that, I don't know. But rather than doing a text message, leaving voice messages and then as a preamble into a conversation, so there's some certainty and some understanding there before you then have a full conversation, and that seems to work well for quite a few people.
Well, I'm working on another book right now on visual thinking, and I'm working with my co-author, and we have these big long interview calls, but then she likes to communicate with me by text while she's writing, because if I call her, that interrupts her concentration. But I can text her some little thing, and then she'll text me back. And then she sent an email with bigger questions, and then I write them back. And that's working out really well. I found out that's the way she likes to communicate. And she's highly, highly verbal, definitely not autistic, highly, highly verbal, very linear in her thinking. I'm associative. And when you mix the two together, I love the way she rearranges my stuff. I go, man, Betsy, you are just a genius. But on the other hand, I'm putting material in there that she wouldn't have. So the two of us are working together. But we've developed this thing with texting that's really kind of interesting. And I'm going along with it because it's working really well.
Yeah, it's wonderful when you find a way to work with somebody by using all these different tools and techniques, and it may be different to the way other people work, but hey, it doesn't matter. If it works, it works. And it's a creative way of being.
Figuring out what works. I mean, just even with the meat industry, I remember sitting in the office of one company and we were discussing all the different managers in the different departments in this big company. And one would go, that guy's a voicemail guy. That guy's a texter. That one emails. And each one had their favorite thing they did. And so the good manager uses the preferred method of communication.
No, that's great. I understand that completely. Yeah, I understand that completely. And it's lovely to be introduced to different things as well. Like the artist I was working with introduced me to the WhatsApp. I hadn't got a clue, and I felt very old when she told me about it.
Well, and there's stuff that a lot of stuff that I don't do. I just had to go on some weird web platform and change the settings on my speakers, and I'm now on the computer speaker set at maximum, and I don't know how to change it. It's going to bother the girls that live next door. I know how to use certain things, and complicated stuff I'm not interested in.
It goes back to, again, I am what I do, because I also am what I do.
Okay, I'm really pleased to be finding out that where we're same on the thing like I am what I do, because I've been saying that for years, and to find other people that are saying I am what I do.
Prior to becoming that and prior to understanding that, I just couldn't cope. But now that I am what I do and I understand what I'm good at, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Amazing. Amazing. I wish I didn't have to jump in and stop this conversation. Okay, ready for the next conversation? So we're on to intersectionality, social justice, and autism. Off you go, Grace Temple. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Professor Grandin. I'm delighted to be able to speak to you today. Firstly introduce myself. I'm Grace Contock. I am a psychotherapeutic counsellor, a writer and a researcher. I'm currently researching how we can work trauma-informed news and data delivery to make it more possible for people to access difficult information without going into overwhelm. I first came across your work in my own therapeutic work. I get equine facilitated psychotherapy, so therapy with horses.
Okay.
And my therapist introduced me to your work, which really spoke to me, especially because, which comes to my topic, what I have experienced is that for many people, I have registered as kind of quote unquote too diverse. So autism, we know that we're not seeing the recognition, the diagnosis of autism in women, and we historically haven't in people of colour. Hazel has just raised some fantastic questions we're going to get to in the Q&A about difficulties around different cultural ideas and thoughts around autism. My experience has been that as I've lived with impairments, I'm disabled, so people could kind of handle maybe me being a wheelchair user, or they could handle me being autistic, or I could be on the LGBTQIA+ person, but I couldn't be everything. And actually, I registered there were too many intersections that I sat at. And so what I wanted to start with was just to ask, what are your thoughts on representation in depictions of autism, who we see as presented as autistic?
Well, I always try to talk about, a lot of historical figures that probably were autistic, like Einstein, Tesla, Michelangelo, Thomas Edison. These are people, things that, you can see a brain can either be more cognitive and thinking, or a brain can be more emotional. In the mild forms, it's just a personality variant. You see, I think one thing I'm concerned about is the whole sort of over medicalization. I'm concerned about that. But I think we got to start showing things we can do. That's why, I had to pick a field where my math, I'm not good at math. I wanted to do stuff like design artificial hips and things like that. I couldn't do the math. So I wanted to do a lot of engineering work, but I can't do algebra. So find something where I can use my skills, my visual thinking skill, really well.
No, that sounds really important. Thank you. And just, working through, excuse me, dogs, please be quiet. I have two rescue dogs, and apparently they're picking this moment to make noise. And so, finding your niche and finding what a place that's safe to do what works for you, I'm hearing is really key in everybody who's spoken today. And what I'm also, the other thing, one of the things I was thinking of wanted to bring, which is coming from my own work at the moment, is where autism overlaps with trauma, or for survivors of trauma, because I've experienced that many people have put autistic traits down as trauma response. And so trauma survivors have missed being diagnosed as autistic. And conversely, some autistic people have they've had trauma responses and it said, oh no, that's not that, that's autism. And so both ways I'm seeing things like, because I work with my clients with trauma, so things like need for routine, struggles in regulation, intensive focus, hypervigilance, high startle reflex, dissociation, social anxiety, being on your own, difficult identifying and expressing emotions is getting put down to trauma when there may also be autism in play. I don't know if you have any thoughts on the overlap between trauma and autism.
So you're saying there's an overlap, person who's actually had trauma? Will there be some symptoms that would be similar? Some sensory sensitivities, flashbacks, getting a big fear response over something, because until I took antidepressant medication, which I've been on for 40 years, which I described in Thinking in Pictures, my nervous system was in a constant state of fear over absolutely nothing. And then what the medication did is damp it down. I since have found that my fear center is larger than normal. And trauma can also sensitize the nervous system. If somebody has been abused, or a military person has had horrible experiences, that can upregulate the nervous system. So there you would have some symptoms that might be similar, where you get a fearful response over nothing. That could happen in autism, and that also happens in somebody that's had trauma. The nervous system gets upregulated. Okay, now I'm trained in neuroscience, so I tend to look at it scientifically, but that would be similar, upregulation of the fear responses.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I think for myself, my understanding and diagnosis assessment of autism came late because I am also a trauma survivor. So I think a lot of what we put down to symptoms of trauma were actually traits of autism. But what I'm looking at at the moment is also what happens if we actually have these things stacking.
Well, yeah, then what happens is you're probably going to see some people with autism, especially some of the verbal thinkers in autism, some of the guys, they don't have that upregulated fear response. But if you have nervous system that's already upregulated, then you put trauma on top of it, it just makes it worse. The results are going to be additive. That's shown up in animal experiments.
Yes.
So then the fear response is upregulated even more, because my fear response has been controlled with antidepressant medication. But I've talked to psychiatrists who have dealt with very severely traumatized soldiers, and they said, I try every drug in the book and none of them work, because the brain has gotten so upregulated, messed up.
And I definitely have experience in that increased the hypervigilance that occurs.
Yeah, hypervigilance. That's exactly what it is. And when you look at some of the research on PTSD, the person that has the more hyper nervous system is going to be more damaged by trauma.
Yes, I think about it less as damage and more as creative adjustments we're using to survive, because I think for myself that what I would have done was become hypervigilant in a response to trauma to try and help myself survive something which I shouldn't have had to survive. We shouldn't have to go through traumatic or abusive incidents. That's not a thing that humans should do to other humans. And so I see it that it was something that helped me get through something, but now I'm left with that response, which makes sense given my history, but actually in the moment doesn't make sense. So for example, maybe somebody tries to help pre-pandemic with somebody goes to help with my wheelchair. My response is very, very startled, kind of thinking, don't touch me, because I'm remembering other incidents which were very, very painful. But to the person, it must seem very strange, because in the moment they're thinking, well, nothing happened. Why is she crying? Whereas actually to me, I'm experiencing a historical response, which makes sense given the context of what I've survived, even if in that moment between us, it doesn't seem like much is happening at all. And what I'm really aware of is for many people who have different marginalized identities, the world doesn't register as safe. So for example, many people of color, we've seen in 2020 with Black Lives Matter and many of the things that came to light of how unsafe many people of color are in various situations with various institutions and engagement with different professionals, the amount of medical racism that exists, for example, that people actually aren't feeling safe at any point within that situation, and just really noticing, you know, how we can consider autism and Professor Kimberly Crenshaw's work alongside that, with that.
Yeah, and you know, these things, you know, I've also heard about, you know, a lot of women on the spectrum being, you know, abused by guys. And I've remained celibate because I haven't seen a marriage I've wanted to be in. And I got exposed to, unfortunately, my aunt's ranch. Her husband was like I don't know, Jekyll and Hyde drunk. When he was sober, he was super nice, really nice. And when he was drunk, he was a swear word spewing, screaming devil. And I got exposed to that. And then, you know, that did not have a good effect on me.
Well, that had an impact.
Yeah, it did. I'm going, I can't ever be in that kind of situation. I'm going to tell the guy to just get lost.
And thankfully,
see, I can't understand why would they even want to stay with him.
Say that again for me. I didn't quite catch that. Sorry.
I just said that, you know, that I wondered why my aunt stayed with him, and she says, "Well, because he needs me."
I think why people stay in domestic violence situations is there's a complex cycle there, which I know we don't have time to go into today, but I know when you're on the outside of it, it can seem really kind of just really questioning, you know, why is this happening? Why doesn't the person go? But actually, what we do know from research on this and from people's lived experience is that it is complex. But thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate your time with us.
Thank you, both of you. Yeah, that's a topic that we could go so deep on, isn't it? And, you know, maybe we will at a different event. So we're going to take a short break now. So just to ask the people who have put questions into the Q&A, would you like to ask those questions yourself, or would you prefer them to be read out for you? Callum, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll happily ask now. Let me see if
Okay. Great. We're just waiting for the professor to come back. And Anne Galpin, where's Anne? Would you like to ask your questions, or would you like them to be read out?
I'd like to ask them, but I'm a bit in an ADHD kind of phase at the moment, so I might not articulate them very well. But one of the this is to all of the panelists, including Temple Grandin, but it's an honour to have you and hear you with us. In Cambridge, UK, where I live, so I'm just using myself as an example of I fear is happening on a much larger scale. So for adults with late life diagnosis, for many of us, it's like sort of the scales falling from your eyes. You may have been living your whole life thinking your primary diagnosis is mental distress, but in fact, knowing that there might be other solutions and tools that you can use is sort of like a rush of joy. But then you find out that you've had this sort of, you've jumped the hurdles, finally got assessed, and then you're told that unless you can fund it yourself, you're told that you're in a 2 to 3 year waiting list for sort of like further assessment on which particular flavors of autistic spectrum conditions you may have and what tools can be offered to help you. So for people who may have people who may have wandered in the dark for 30, 40 years, and then see a chink of light that there may actually be things that they can do to move their situation forward. The pandemic, I mean, that 2 to 3 year wait felt, okay, I can handle that. But then last year in May, the whole of the people on the wait list I know, because I know quite a few other autistic women in Cambridge waiting for diagnosis, we received a letter saying that the class clinic had to be closed because of the pandemic, and because of you can't do one-to-one in-person consultations and virtual consultations with autism, they didn't consider it, you know, and that felt to me like it's like the rug's pulled from under you again. And I catapulted into a sort of catatonic state for months, which wasn't so much with the pandemic, though I knew that a lot of people were upset about the pandemic, but it just felt hopeless again. And I know that not everybody has good resources for the mental distress that you experience as a result of not being seen or heard or understood. And I'm wondering how widely spread this is in the States and in Wales and the whole of the UK, this halting of diagnosis and access to possible help. And is that going to exacerbate mental distress already felt by the pandemic?
Does anybody want to take that question? There's somebody I think might be quite qualified for it, Grace, but anybody can if they want to. Gaia, do you want to take this?
I'm happy to jump in there.
Go for
I'm
it.
happy to jump in there. I don't actually know the situation of what's going on in Wales at the moment as to whether things have been halted. Yeah, as I say, I don't know about that. And obviously, if people are pursuing a diagnosis, they've decided that a diagnosis is important to them. Having said that, bearing in mind we're in a pandemic and all that, and we've got to make the best of things and work in a different way. There is a lot of information out there about using proprioceptive techniques to aid your mental state, physical state with if you are neurodiverse, and it also helps with other conditions as well. So there is absolutely no reason why you can't employ those techniques without a diagnosis, because if they help fantastic, and it doesn't stop you continuing to pursue that diagnosis either. I do feel that it's terrible that you need to wait such a long time. And I was shocked at you saying how long it was in Cambridge. When I was diagnosed, it was a new service and I was very, very lucky. It only took 5 months. Our son had to wait 2 years within the same service because he pursued it just after. But there are so many really high quality blogs out there and trying to think of the word, podcasts. There's one called Square Peg, absolutely amazing. And I must say that, excuse me if people think this is a bit of self-promotion, I just want to help people. I'm actually on a mission to get all that information out there as to how people can support each other, because support yourself, because I was very, very lucky. I could see an occupational therapist after my diagnosis on the NHS. Absolutely brilliant. But I am so aware as to how lucky I was to get that support. And now I'm on a mission to get that out to other people, because people need this information. It is so important. And your life is so different when you can use these techniques. So I'm not sure, Anne, if that's answered your question, but I've given you an answer of sorts.
It has, but I'm more worried about, I've actually got quite good internal resources, having survived, you know, many decades in the dark without having any idea that I was on the spectrum, and that I have extreme ADHD, but having learned those, so I'm self-educating. But there are many of us, there are many neurodiverse people who do not have access, or that haven't got the tools within because of their life. You know, if you're in a precarious life situation, or even a practical thing like to try and convince access to work, that's a certain type of pen that might support your attention deficit could enable you to work, or you know, there are different support tools. I find in virtual online meetings now, I find that the speech to text is like an absolute godsend for me, because without that, I can't, I need to return after the discussion and process it slowly at my speed, not at the speed of the webinar. And so there are things that we can learn for ourselves and our self-soothing, but I'm really worried about the people. I'm not so worried about myself. I just use that as an example, but I'm worried about people that might spin off, or, you know, the meltdowns and the distress that people experience. That's what I'm worried about, because there is a high incidence of suicide. And I think it's, and women with extreme ADHD, their life and autism, their life prognosis is like something like 16 years less. Although Temple is a wonderful example. Thank you.
One of the things I wrote in Thinking in Pictures. In fact, there's a new version of Thinking in Pictures. It's just added a new afterword to it. It just came out, just barely came out. And if I hadn't gone on the disipramine, the medication, my health was coming apart. It showed in the movie how I was eating yogurt and Jell-O. Everything went through me. And when I went on the antidepressants, low dose, I want to emphasize the mistake that doctors make is to give too high a dose. And then you get agitation and insomnia. I'm taking a starter dose. I know other people that are taking half a starter dose. I don't care which drug you use, whether it's Prozac or whether, you know, fluoxetine, whatever. It's often a starter dose or less. And the doctors make the mistake of giving too much. But when I went on the medication, it stopped the fear response. And the colitis also cleared up. My health, I don't think I'd be here now at 73 years old if I hadn't gone on this medication because of health issues. You know, I don't think I would have had any intestines left. That's how bad the colitis was.
But we're in a pandemic at the moment, and a lot of people are not accessing their primary healthcare services in situations where they probably normally would, and their doctors might even say they want them to, you know, get in touch with them, but everybody's just too frightened to go to the doctor with anything less than put me in the ITU.
Well, I can tell you, one of the things that saved me, and I have been eating out at restaurants very carefully, because I'm a scientist. I have gone through all the scientific literature. This disease is mostly airborne. Now we do have the more contagious variant now that's out, but it's still mostly airborne. And when you want to avoid tight spaces with lots of people in it, now I already had my medication, you know, so I was already on it. I just made sure it stayed on. One thing that's helped me in the pandemic: get up in the morning, dressed for work by 7:30. Be on a schedule. I started this book as a writing project. I got a few people I visit with. As I got to have stuff to do. All my speaking engagements have gone either virtual or they were canceled. I have not flown since March 12th. I might go on a flight on March 16th. So that would have been a year. I went from a 3 million mile flyer down to a 0 mile flyer. You know, it totally upended my life. I don't get the income from the speaking engagements. But you know, it's been stressful on everybody. But I figured I had to find other stuff to do or I'd go crazy too. And then so I've been stacking up the writing projects. So in the morning I write when I'm fresh. And then if I just have to look up journal articles stuff, I do that at night. Have a few people I have lunch with. My student called during the break. That's why I was late. She just got her paper her scientific paper accepted. So I'm really happy. And we were trying to do something with finalizing that. I was real happy about that. But pandemic's been stressful for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's you know, the vaccines, you're doing better in the UK on vaccines than the rest of Europe is.
Just as well, because we're doing very badly on death. So,
well, I managed, because of my age, I've got my first Pfizer shot, or jab, as you call it. And I already feel better because I'm 9 days now post that shot, so I now have some protection.
Great.
But I was so
Shall we,
nervous that something was going to go wrong, and I wasn't going to. The appointment would get screwed up, and I wouldn't get the shot. I was so nervous.
Oh, yes, apparently there's vaccine hunters now who are going around trying to find the wasted doses that should have gone to somebody. Don't know if that's a real thing or somebody made it
That's
up.
real. That's real, because on the Pfizer product, once they dilute it, ready for shots, is only good for 5 hours.
Yeah, right.
So if they have leftovers, they have to be used very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is true. And now when they come out with some of these other shots like AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, that's a lot less true.
Yeah. Yeah, they have more time.
Well, yeah, they have a lot more time.
How do you feel about having a look at what was in the Q&A? So some of it some of Anne's stuff we've talked about a bit. I'm aware that Callum was in there first and hasn't had a chance to put a question. So Callum, if you want to ask your question now, you go ahead. And say who you're asking it for.
I've got 2 questions really. One's towards Temple. The second's more of an open-asked question. So first question is how do you identify what your autistic joy is? And I reckon this is just a thought, but my joy is through storytelling, be it through video games or film or theatre. But the other part of that problem is, since I'm a very picky person with that sort of thing, because if the actor's not good, if the writing is half-assed, if one of a few factors aren't there, it's just gonna lose interest and it's just gonna not get my attention. But yeah, if it can't be answered because of how individualistic it can be, then yeah, fair enough. The basic idea of what I'm asking is, how do you identify what your autistic joy is?
So how you find your niche, your thing. Okay, to take that.
Well, how did I find my niche? When I was a little kid, my ability in art was always encouraged. I always liked to build things. And then I started going around to feed yards in Arizona working cattle, and gradually got into the design. It started slowly. I had one successful project, then another successful project. And it was also a niche where there weren't many competitors around when it started. Now there's more competitors, but back in the 70s, it was a niche that kind of had it to myself, which was an advantage. It also was a niche where the technology of cattle handling facilities doesn't change like computers keep changing. It's it's much more stable.
Yeah.
And so it was a good niche to be in, and I slowly build up my business.
Can I ask Callum a question?
Go right ahead.
What is it about the storytelling that you like? Is it just listening to it, or do you write?
I think if I was to write, it's something I wouldn't even know where to begin. But actually, funny you should ask that. I'm a uni student who's doing a BA in theatre and drama, who's also in my last year on my second attempt. And come around March time, and be it either start of March or midway through early, I have to create a performance and space that's in relation to it can be in relation to what I wrote about in my research project to write about, which is 500 words. And I wrote mine about how autism or ASD is, what was the wording? I can't think of the right word. But it's how it looks in terms of theatre, how it's represented in theatre and film or TV.
Yeah.
And excuse me. And I've got an idea of what I want to do for that, but the other side of that problem is I have absolutely no idea how to go about it. Since in that writing that I was doing, and I showed some of it to a person called Gina, guy, no, so I'm on about, since as far as I know they've spoken a few times, she had to read that, and she noticed at one point in my writings that there's something I wrote where how there's one type of autism or ASD, if not two, that's only represented on film or telly and film, and there's just no other kind of variation. And my point in that is like you got Rain Man, which is a very really early, and personally it's very cringeworthy because of how dated it is, and it points into some good things which do make a fair point, and it's still true to this day. But the other problem is it's got so many things wrong with it. It's just like you just don't do it because it's just going to cause more.
So I'm going to interrupt really rudely. It's one of the reasons I started going into theatre and wrote my play The Duck about being a late diagnosed autistic woman, was that lack of representation. And what gave me joy in writing that thing I found was I just wanted to tell my story from my perspective, give it very much, not, as you say, the Rain Man and all these different characters often try and squash ideas of autism or diagnose different aspects of autism into one person, as though we have all of them in each of us, and it's not representative.
It doesn't work. Like two series, I'm pretty sure some of you might have seen or heard of which is like Atypical, and both main characters have autism. One's either a complete genius, the other's just so aloof about himself. He has absolutely no idea of the world around him, and he only knows his own habits, his own hobbies, and his own insecurities. He knows absolutely nothing else besides from what's going on around him. Yeah. It's like, really?
Yes, the idea that we've been dropped into the world fully formed, and now we're trying to cope with it, rather than actually we grew up in it. We grew up surrounded by these weird people who aren't autistic, who don't make sense. And actually we have adapted, and we do different things, and we are humans in our own right. And I think when it comes to finding your joy, you need to find that thing that you've got to say, those words that because I think you've got a lot to say. I think you've got a lot that you're so ready to express, and find those things that you want to tell the world, and find a way, and then find your own artistic way to do that, because that's one of the things we're really good at. Once we know where we're going, problem solve to get there.
Definitely. Yeah. Which also, now you've brought that on, that pretty much leads on to what my second question is. And
okay, Callum, make this a short one, because I'd like to be able to get some other people's questions in too. So do your best. Make it short.
So I'll try and keep this quick. So obviously leading on from what was said earlier, the open question is what do any of you think about the Good Doctor and Atypical in relation to how it's represented to us as people with ASD, autism, or whatever in that branch we have, and how well do you think it's represented?
Are you talking about Atypical, the series?
Yeah, that's right.
Atypical. I don't know if anybody wants to talk about that. I don't have particular experience on that. No.
Sorry, no. I don't know about the.
Maybe we haven't seen that yet. Sorry about Callum.
It's fine.
But maybe we should put it on your Netflix list. All right, we've got a few more in the Q&A. I noticed Matthew Goff. Matthew, would you like to ask your question yourself, or would you like me to read it out?
No, I can speak. It's maybe more of an observation than a question, and links into what's been said. You know, Atypical as a TV series is mainly representing white people, and Grace touched on the notion of intersectionality, and it feels really important to say the concept of intersectionality was developed by a black female scholar, and that it's really important to remember that at its heart is the intersection of race with other things that exclude you. I prefer to keep that as a different notion from overlapping layers of other things that exclude you. I think otherwise we reappropriate a racial perspective. So yeah, I think it feels really important, you know, that we understand and have heard the struggles that you know, we can have as autistic people, with healthcare, education, the police, and so on and so forth. And but actually, all of these things are complicated by race and other factors. And so actually, you know, what is being, you know, where is the drive to address those things? Where is the coming together? You know, I think Grace very clearly asked the question around, you know, examples of, you know, famous black autistic people, should we say, and that came up short. But, you know, where are we working with those people? Where are we spending time with our colleagues and peers who are othered? And it's just, you know, given part of the push around this evening's notions around social justice and intersectionality, it feels like it's been absent from the conversation today.
You just educated me. So thank you. I didn't realise that that particular term had come from those origins. I was not aware of that. Do any of the guests want to talk to that particularly?
I think it's another barrier to diagnosis, certainly. I mean, that's what, when I'm thinking about all the different ways that underdiagnosis happens, women are underdiagnosed, and anybody who isn't white is severely underdiagnosed. And that's a real issue in the way that we don't look for autism outside of young white boys, really. And that's it. I don't have a huge amount of knowledge on the issue, but I think it's so important that we start actually talking about that and addressing that issue and looking for it. Because what happened with, you know, I look at women a lot, and what happened with that is when they started looking for autism in women and girls, they found it, because we're everywhere, and we're not in any one race, we're not in any one culture, we're not in any one, you know, we're disabled, we're everywhere. And we need to start actually addressing that issue. And I'm really glad you brought it up, and I wish I had more expertise on it.
I'd actually like to read the information where the intersectionality came from. I'd like to understand more about I understand the concept, but I want to understand it from the person that originally devised it and understand more about them. Is there anything that the person that posed the question, could you put the information in the chat, a link or a name or something like that, so I can go and research and understand more?
I'd agree with that.
Grace has already put a great link into the chat and the name of the person.
Thank you.
I just wanted to come in and add and say, although I know, and just start by saying my apologies. My intention was to bring this forward. I was very aware of being on an all-white panel and not comfortable with that. My intention was to bring this forward and make sure that it was a part, and it sounds from what you've shared that I haven't managed to do that today, and my apologies. I wanted to reference Dr. Crenshaw, I believe I did, but clearly I didn't cite her work appropriately and give it the primacy it deserves. And I will be working on that in future. Thank you for raising it.
Thank you. Just to alleviate you slightly there, it's not that you didn't quote her. I just think a lot of people don't know. I think a lot of people see names and don't recognize what's behind them. And I think in a place where as many people have said, there's something about seeing people who are like you, but really understanding those contexts. So the moment in which you see a famous person, you go, oh, okay, they have autism, and you go, oh, all right, or anything. And so just, yeah, it's the context that I think people don't know, not that you didn't identify it.
No problem. Just, yeah, we're not seeing that, as Professor Grandin was, thinking about famous people with autism. I don't know if I recording all the names, but we aren't bringing forward people of color. We aren't seeing depictions of them. It's not something which is included, and this is a problem. And I really appreciate that you brought up this question.
And I think we should do something about it.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Not tonight, but we will do something about it, and learn be a bit more educated before we speak up next time. I'd like to see if there's anybody who's got a question that they haven't put into the. Oh, Samantha's waving furiously at me.
Put mine in. Sorry.
Have you put yours in?
I've already. Yeah, I put mine in. Sorry, I pre-waved. As you.
I don't see it.
Mine's about the anesthesia.
About the what?
Anesthesia, no internal, no imagination. I've recently discovered I have it.
Well, I can talk about this. Aphantasia.
Thank you.
Aphantasia. And I've done a lot of research on this. It is a person who's absolutely not a visual thinker. They have no pictures in their mind. And some of these people are very good at math, extremely good at math. Some are not. The other thing that's interesting in reviewing literature on this is that some of them will have dreams in pictures. But if I say to you, think about what your office looks like at work, they don't see it. I have had a chance to talk to about 3 of these people, and they tend
I'm one.
You're one. Okay.
I'm one. Yeah, I see black. When I close my eyes, there's just darkness. I can feel the sensation in my mind. I can tell you where everything is, but I cannot picture it. It's the feelings, and music's very important because it brings me to places. But as an artist, it's a bit challenging, but I'm cracking on anyway because it's more outsider art. It just comes. So I just wanted to know your experience.
Well, I'm definitely not that, but I mean, the correct term is aphantasia. A-P-H. I mean, I have to write it down. I have terrible working memory. I have to write it down. I have no working memory, so I have to write it down. Aphantasia. A is in apple. P-H-A. N is in never. T is in Thomas, or T. A-S-I-A. Aphantasia.
There's a link in the chat.
Search term on Google Scholar, you can find it. But I went to dinner with a speech therapist, and she drives a car, so she obviously sees. And I asked her to visualize going into her office. We were at her home, and she said, "Well, can you see a door of your office?" Nope. She just knows. Well, it's to the right. I walk, certain distance down. And her husband used to say, "The camera's been turned off in your head."
Yeah, it's like that, and I've only found out in the last year how you said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe everybody doesn't think like that." I genuinely thought when people said they could see things in their mind that they were mocking or that was the case. And it's such a revelation at 50 to be waiting for a diagnosis for autism, ADHD, and then this on top of it. It's like, whoa. But understanding helps me. Now I take photos of things if I want to do for reference, but it's learning these tools to deal with so we can keep going, and not let these little things put us back, and that was why I was wondering if you'd come across many people that
well, I have talked personally to about 3 people, and I had dinner at a speech therapist's house. She was a professor of speech therapy at a university. Had dinner at her house, and we discussed this for about an hour. I did not know the correct name for it at that time. I just learned that about a year ago, aphantasia. But when I was in my 20s and 30s, I thought everybody thought in pictures.
Yeah.
I didn't know that my thinking was different.
Do you know what? I hate to do this because we could just do this for hours on end, but I know the professor has to leave it and we have to cut off at in 2 minutes time, exactly 2 minutes time.
Okay, somebody asked here, I want to answer this question really quickly, what medication I'm on. It's actually an old generic called disipramine, and it's in my book, Thinking in Pictures, disipramine. It's an ancient old generic. I've been on it for 40 years. It's tricyclic antidepressant, one of the real old ones. And now to spell it, I have to write it out. You see, I have a working memory problem. Like a kind of a complicated word like that, I have to write it out before I can read it. It's D as in dog, E, S as in Sally, I, P as in Paul, R as in Robert, A, M as in Mary, I-N-E, disipramine. And it saved me. And there's other people who have done well on Prozac or, fluoxetine or sertraline, some of these other medications. But I don't know what would have happened to me if I hadn't found it. I don't think I would have been able to have done a lot of the things I did. It was better living through chemistry. And it was hard for me to accept the idea of taking a drug. When I first learned about it, by being very good in scientific literature, I set the papers aside. And then I had a very stressful eye surgery. And that's when I decided that I was going to have to get the drug. And within 2 or 3 days, I worked. And the label only says depression. So I faked depression to get it out the doctor. And I took this low dose and it worked. And it was better living through chemistry. That's the slogan of an old chemistry company. That's all I can say for me. And my experiences, I'd recommend reading that. If you want to copy that chapter and pass it around, that's fine.
Can I encourage everybody to put your cameras back on again and just do it disability art style and give a big hand-waving ovation to Professor Grandin and to our guests, Grace, Gaia and Ree. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the BSL interpreters. Thank you to the panotypists. Thank you to Ruth for introducing, and just thank you to everybody for being here. It's been a lovely event, and we recorded it. So bingo. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, and I want to hear about from the lady from China. I want to hear about that.
Yeah, we will make sure that you are put in contact. Yeah,
want to follow up on
definitely. Yeah, sounds like it. Sounds like it's good that you found out about that.
Can I just say apologies to those whose questions weren't asked. We will try and look at them and answer them in written form in some way, but we really do value all your contributions tonight. Thank you for coming, and let us get more intersectional. Let us really get acting on it, really challenge us, help us to reach more people and get more voices into these important conversations. Yep. Thank you for everything you've done tonight. Thanks, Rachel, and everybody else. Safe journey as you switch your cameras off, because we don't leave and go out anywhere anymore. I hope to see you soon. Bye.
Thanks
everybody.
Very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure.